Well, happy Super Bowl Sunday to all of you, specifically to my guest on this episode, Allan with Green Archer Comics. Allan, thanks so much for hanging out with me and skipping all of your tailgate plans to talk comics with me today.
This is my tailgate plan, man. I got wings here. I got nachos.
Perfect.
I'm good to go. I'm going
What
to be
else
shoving
do
it in
you
my
need?
face as we talk comics.
Just do me a favor and as you chew, mute yourself so that I don't have to listen to it. I'm definitely one of those. There's a word for that, like what is it, misophoniac or something? I don't know. It's something about I don't like hearing people chew. But
Oh, that's good. I don't chew. I just swallow whole, so no problem.
You just completely just shovel it right in. What a great start to a new episode here on Long Box Punk. That's me. I'm Chris. I'm the Long Box Punk. Like I said, I'm joined by Allan, who started Green Archer Comics. And give me why did you start Green Archer Comics? Let's start there and then we'll get into your origin story and all that stuff.
Sure. So it was an accident. I didn't mean to start a comic book company, which, I guess that's like every origin story is always accidental, right?
Yep.
You don't intend to get bit by a radioactive spider. And if you're thinking about doing it to get superpowers, I do not recommend it. And so what happened is I do, as you can see from the sign behind me, I do ransomware incident response. And I spend a lot of time on airplanes and in conference rooms and in front of a computer and so on. And like a lot of people in my profession, I really love old time radio because there's thousands of episodes. You can download them. You can listen to them while you're on a plane. And, it's like where like my son, who's 22, his sort of background TV is The Office, where he can just put it on and work away because it doesn't distract him because he knows every episode. For me, it was yours truly, Johnny Dollar. I could listen to those episodes over and over again while I'm, on a plane working on a report. I mean, assuming the guy in front of me hasn't put their seat 2 inches in front of my face. And so that I just enjoyed that. And I found out that there were a lot of other people who in the same profession as I am, who also like these kind of old-time radio programs, again, because it's background music. And so especially yours truly, Johnny Dollar, who for, the people listening, and I'm guessing most of them, since they're probably under 100, haven't heard of this. It was a radio show that ran from 49 to 62, and it was about a freelance insurance investigator. So most of the like tough guys at the time were cops or ex-cops or private eyes or whatever. This guy was just an insurance investigator that traveled around the world and stop bad guy in the service of helping insurance companies. And his narrative hook, or the narrative hook for the show, was his expense account. He was called the man with the action-packed expense account. And when I first started listening to this when I was a kid, I had no idea what an expense account is. Now I am painfully familiar with the concept, as anybody who's worked in a corporate environment and travels a lot is. And so, one of my buddies was like, hey, this would be a really cool comic book, because we had both bonded over our love of comic books. I'm like, yeah, somebody should do that. And he's like, well, you should do it. And I'm like, me? And I'm like, all right, man, I guess. How hard can it be to make a comic? And spoiler alert, it turns out it's really hard to make a comic.
Turns out, yeah.
And so, and he's like, well, throw it up on Kickstarter. Maybe there'll be some interest. You have a lot of people that follow you on, what was at the time called Twitter. Maybe they'll back it and so on. And so, I went ahead and made the first comic book and then threw it up, or I wrote it, and then I hired artists to do the artwork because I can't draw to save my life.
Same.
And we threw it up on Kickstarter, and for the first one, we had like $9,000 in backing, and I'm like, oh my god, like, now we have to start a comic book company, because I had an idea for a 4-arc series, but I wasn't even sure if we were going to get through the first one. And then not only did we fund the first one, we had enough to start the second one. And I'm like, well, I got to do something with that to make it permanent. And then, as that happened, I'm like, there are all these other really old characters that I love that I would love to see turned into comics or see modern adaptations of or extend their old stories. And I'm like, can I keep doing that? And then, it turns out you can, as long as your wife doesn't divorce you for turning your study into a comic books, supply and comic book storage facility. You actually can do that. And so we named the comic book after the Green Archer, which is one of my favorite characters. It's a pulp novel written by Edgar Wallace. And I love this story because it's weird. It's weird and complex and goes into all kinds of strange places. But there was so much that you could do with the character that I'm like, this is really cool. And also, the Green Archer, the book, was published in 1923. Okay. In 1940, they made a movie serial out of it, and I don't know if you can see behind me, but I have the there we go. Nope, on the shelf right there, I've got like the original press packet they sent out with that. And it was the most successful movie serial up to that point. And in 1941 is when the Green Arrow got made, and in part because of the success of the Green Archer. So it was, so it's kind of cool because I've always liked the Green Arrow as a character. Yeah. And to be able to expand on the lore that got the Green Arrow launched is kind of neat. And I'm sorry, I know that was really long and a whole lot.
That's great. If anything, you just beat me to like 3 other questions that I had.
Sorry.
Because I also love the Green Arrow. And I didn't realize that part of the origin or like part of the influence for the Green Arrow was from the Green Archer. So I'm definitely going to try and find that novel to read because I'm just a fan of archers. Like Hawkeye is my favorite Avenger. Green Arrow is one of my favorite DC characters, like period. And I like archers, and I can't shoot an arrow to save my life, but I bought like a bow and arrow set for my daughter when she was like 5, 6, and 7, and she was getting pretty decent at it. I threw away quite a few trash cans because she just kept puncturing them in the backyard. But I didn't realize that the roots were in like an old pulp novel. So when you say movie, a serialized movie, what does that mean?
So back in the day, back in the 1940s, for most people, the only thing that was air conditioned in their town were the library and the movie theater, because air conditioning was very rare.
Yep.
And so people would spend their Saturdays at the movie theater, and you'd have your main feature, which was whatever Western or whatever you were going to go see.
Yeah.
And then ahead of that, you'd have a 15-minute newsreel. That all the stories from the week collected into a newsreel, and then before that they would run movie serials, and those were 15-minute chapterized. Sorry, the AI in my camera doesn't like the hand motions. I know I just did like a weird 70s psychedelic thing.
It's like, no, we're really dialing in here on this.
Right. Hands down. But so they take these. So the Green Archer movie is 4 hours long, and they would break it into 15-minute serials, and you'd play those ahead of them. So that way you'd have to go to the movie theater every week to find out what happened in the serial. So like, if you're familiar with the Captain Midnight YouTube channel, that's based on another one of those serials where Captain Midnight was a hero and who went to the moon and so on. And they had Superman movie serials and Batman movie serials and a whole bunch of others that were like that, because again, it kept people in the theater longer, so you got to stay cool longer, and you spent more money on popcorn and sodas. And it was basically a free movie before your main feature. And so you think about it, it's almost like what we do with Netflix now, where Netflix like shoots a whole 8-hour movie and then breaks it down into hour or half-hour parts. Well, that was basically the same thing. They would shoot the whole serial at once, but then they'd break it down, and then at the end it would be it could sometimes get really bad where the in the Green Hornet serial, the Black Beauty goes flying off of the edge of a cliff before at the end of one, and then beginning, it didn't quite go flying off, it made a last minute turn when you start up the next one, but you always had to have those cliffhangers over the end, which is where the term cliffhanger comes from. Is in the movie serials they would literally, he's going to fall off the cliff. Oh no, he's not. He's perfectly fine in the next one. But that awesome catch to get people to come back in.
Yeah. So it truly was a cliffhanger.
Exactly, right.
Man, I'm about to learn so much today. I'm stoked, Allan. So because my degree is in broadcasting, so I studied like the history of broadcasting and the history of journalism, and going all the way back to like the old radio shows and the radio dramas, and then slowly climbing forward into the 20s and the 30s, and then as all of the entertainment started becoming visual, then how all of that ramped up. And so anytime that I similarly, I love listening to the old radio dramas, because one of our projects was to create a radio drama. So like we had to record everything, make the sound effects, write a script, and like turn it into a 15-minute radio drama. And so because we did that, I just have such an appreciation for the artwork and the craft that went into creating those, that anytime I listen to a really well executed radio drama, I'm like, man, this is so good. And like, it just, even though I'm not that old, I wasn't around, right? It's a very nostalgic experience for me, because it takes me back to when I first discovered them in college. And then that takes it back to like, man, this is what people used to gather around the radio every night and listen to the Green Hornet and like all of the characters. And that was the entertainment. They didn't sit and just watch and veg and Netflix and chill and all, like it was just radio dramas. So I love
radio and chilling. That's for sure.
Right. There could be. I'm not saying it's not possible, but
that would be a really interesting study. I don't want to get too academic here, but I would be really curious to see if that was like a date attraction. Like, oh, hey, why don't you come over and we'll watch, whatever the latest radio drama is, or whatever whatever radio show is going to be on. Come over and watch that, and that'll be our date night. Because you don't hear about that as a date night, but there must have been like, kind of like, and you may be too young for this, but kind of like in the 80s and 90s when it was like, come listen to my fancy stereo. There might have been like, we got a brand new radio with stereophonic sound or whatever. Come listen to it at our house. It would be kind of interesting to see whether or not that ever was a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because then you look at like the 50s and 60s and you start seeing all of the like Lover's Lane type stuff. And it's like, yeah, let's take a ride in the hot rod and listen to the radio and then go to Lover's Lane and chill.
Right.
So it definitely was a thing, decades later.
Right.
But I would imagine, like, what did people do for dates in like the 19-teens, right? Like 1917. What do you do? Sock hops?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you went to the school dances and stuff, I guess, or the local, whatever, the Rotarians or whatever were throwing their annual dance, or the 4-H club or whatever. I guess I probably did. It's actually, again, I'm sorry for getting so academic, but it's actually really interesting. I don't know if you've ever read a book called Bowling Alone. And it's a really interesting book about how we've lost kind of that. We've lost kind of the activities that used to be really common in society. Like my dad forever was in a bowling league, right? Yeah. But I'm not in a bowling league. Right. When I was younger, I was in a softball league, but my son has no interest in being in a softball league, and like the Lions Club and the Moose and the Knights of Columbus and all of those kind of socialization things that were there have disappeared over the last few decades. I mean,
Yeah.
we've replaced it somewhat with Facebook groups or Slack or Discord channels, but it's not quite the same thing as interacting in person. And if you go to there's still plenty of bowling alleys out there, but if you go look, the average age of the people on the bowling team is about 107.
Yep.
So we don't really have those kind of communal spaces anymore. It's one of the things that I think would really be, there's a lot of talk about comic book stores being in trouble and so on, but I think you could turn a comic book store into that kind of communal place. Have a book club, like a graphic novel club, where people sit around and talk. Because most people, their interaction with the comic book store, if they're regulars, is go in, pick up the stuff from your box, go home. Maybe talk to the guy behind the counter, but you don't talk to anybody else in the store. You go get your stuff and leave. I think there's an opportunity there, both to save comics and to improve the lot of comic book stores if we can figure out ways to turn them into more communal spaces.
Yeah, and you're definitely onto something, because as like a teenager, I was going through that, like, what can we possibly do? Like, in where I grew up, it wasn't like the middle of the country, but it wasn't a big bustling city. So it was like, well, do we go walk around the mall? Do we go sit at Perkins and play cards because they're open until forever? Like, they're always open, so we can go. And we would usually end up at either Perkins or Steak and Shake because they were open 24 hours. And we would just we'd order food and then sit there for 3 hours. And like, that's all we did, but because that's all we had to do. There wasn't a ton of stuff. And I'm glad that you mentioned comic shops doing that. Shameless plug for my pals over at Crooked Dog Comics in Middletown, Ohio. Like, they are doing regular events. They've got a whole back room that's specifically for like D&D campaigns. And they do D&D like one shots to like teach new players how to play on like Thursday nights. And so everybody shows up on Thursdays and they have a couple experienced players. And then if you're new, like, they'll teach you how to play. And then they do regular, like, weekly, I think it's on Saturdays, that like they will have an 8-hour block of just like, hey, come play your campaign, like, do the thing. Like, we got a room, we got snacks, we got drinks, like, come hang out. And so they're trying to build and foster that communal aspect, because it's true. Like, every time I go to my local shop where, I've got my pull list and all that stuff, I go in, I talk to the owner for a little bit, I go grab my books, I might talk to the other employee if he's there. And then, like, I don't talk to any other customers, like, I've only talked to them once, and it's because they were like, hey, you look like you do this a lot. What would a good book for my son be? And I was like, I would love to show you, like, let's go do the thing. And so, like, but other than that one time, I'm not in there like, rubbing elbows and just talking with everybody else. I'm like, I just want to get my books and see if there's no, I gotta go. Like, I got life, and it just it's not like a destination like I think it could be. But apparently we're not the only ones that have it. Like Chris said, they've got a Magic the Gathering group that plays at his shop.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like, that's super. And having it on Wednesday nights is so freaking smart, because it's like, hey, yeah, come on Wednesdays when we have new books out. Like, because then if you go, you're attracting multiple crowds, right? You've got the Magic kids, you've got the comic kids. Sometimes there's overlap, sometimes they're separate. In my high school, they were separate. Like, we were like, we don't talk to Magic kids, and the Magic kids were like, we don't talk to those comic nerds. But like, if you can meld those two with an event like that, or with the D&D kids and comic kids, like, suddenly then you're fostering more of a community that then is more willing to, like, hey, this was a lot of fun. You want to, like, walk down to the coffee shop and grab some coffee and keep hanging out? Like, that's what I feel like is missing with a lot of things now with this, technology. And it's easy to blame COVID for, forcing everybody to isolate and then find ways to still communicate. And now that we figured it out, it's like, well, this is really convenient. Like we can do this. And then as soon as we're done here, I can turn around and go sit down on my couch. I don't have to drive home after hanging out with somebody.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. But I do think you miss out with some of that, direct face-to-face human interaction. And
Yeah.
younger people may disagree with me. Like, you may, okay, boomer, that's great. And I'm Gen X, not boomer. Thank you very much. So, okay, Gen X is fine. Don't you dare call me a boomer.
Right, right.
Some younger people may disagree with me, and they may think that that's that's dumb. But I do think you miss out when you don't have that face to face interaction.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot to be said too with like it's hard to empathize over virtual communication. Like it's so difficult because you don't get tone with texting. Like my daughter's 18. We, text. If we didn't text and I counted the number of times that we've talked like on a phone or in person, I've talked to her twice in the last probably 3 months following those rules. Right. But like we text regularly and that's just talking. And I told my mom that, and she just got a cell phone and it's been a whole thing. But because no, she was like, I made a sticker. And I'm like, please stop, Mom. But what's my memoji? Please, Mom, stop. But she doesn't see texting as talking. She's like, oh, well, you texted. Like, that's different. I'm like, it's not though. Like that, it's 2025. That is talking. And it's just that shift in, understanding like the social norms almost. Like the idea of getting together with a family and sitting around a radio to listen to a radio drama, if you think about it in today's standards, like when was the last time as a whole family you got together and sat down and watched a TV show or a movie for an hour and a half, right? Like it's very infrequent.
Yeah, I mean, tonight is probably the one time a year where many families do actually get together and do that. So it's appropriate that we're having this conversation today because, yeah. So, like, my wife and I make an effort to do that, right? She likes her kind of shows, I like my kind of shows, but then we try and find one that we can watch, one or two that we can watch together, and and that's our time. We watch those together. We watch a movie together or whatever. We want to make sure that we have that time where we're bonding like that. It used to be more common, but with so much out there, it's less and less common because she doesn't want to watch my superhero shows. Although she did watch She-Hulk with me and she really liked it.
Nice.
But finding that kind of overlap is hard. She likes procedural police dramas, and I'm like, oh my god, these are all the same thing and they're stupid. Please stop making me watch them. It's all Columbo, but then and Columbo was Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock Holmes was Auguste Dupin from Edgar Allan Poe. So I've seen the whole thing for 150 years now. But anyway, I'm sorry for anybody that loves your police procedurals. They're lovely, I'm sure. Please buy my comics and don't be mad at me for saying this.
So I love like talking about the differences of stuff because with so many options, there's bound to be something for everybody. And the same can be said now for comics. But and I know I've mentioned it before, but I freaking love it. So Charles Soule, who's done all sorts of comic book writing and has written prose novels and all of the things, my library did like a virtual series where they were talking to authors and he was on talking about his novel. But I was like, I'm watching because that dude wrote like Killer Daredevil and 8 Million Genies and, all of these books that I really enjoy. And so I watched it and the majority of it was novels. And I was just like, I haven't read any of I didn't even know you write prose. But then he said something, I don't remember how they got there, but he said, not everything is for everyone. And just kept right on going. Right. And I just was shook and I missed the rest of the thing. Cause I was just like, God, that is so profound. Like not everything has to be for everyone. Meaning like, if you don't buy his book, that's okay. It might not be for you. And that's the same thing with the superhero movies, with all of the shows and my wife also loves the true dramas. She loves that stuff. And I'm like, I don't care. And she loves, she watches a ton of cooking And there's a couple that I'm like, okay, I'll watch that with you. But for the most part, I'm like, you watch your cooking show and I'll sit here and read my comics and we're happy. Like, that's perfect. But I hit the jackpot because she loves superheroes. She likes all of the superhero and comic book based media for the most part. And I'm just trying to win her over now by like buying her comics, and I just keep buying her comics, and eventually she'll realize that she likes comics, and then she'll start going to the shop with me. But until we get there, I just keep like, hey, I saw this and I know you like this. So like, she loves the Metal Men because she used to read that comic with her dad, and her dad loved the Metal Men. And so like, that was anytime I see one of the original run Metal Men issues, I'm like, does she have that one? I don't think so. I'll buy it. And then like, I'll wait until Christmas or something, like, here you go, comics. But yeah, I definitely struck it with like her enjoying similar things, but there's still plenty. Like, she doesn't watch nearly as much horror as I do, and I would be concerned if she did. I'm kind of concerned with the true crime because a lot of it is like how the killers got away. And so if I just disappeared one day, I'm not saying it would be her, but like, there's a good chance that she would know how to get away with it because she's watched so much of it.
Well, the good news for you is, since my wife has watched all the detective shows ever, we'll bring her in to solve the crime. So, because they always make that one mistake.
There's always one. Yeah.
Right.
So we talked a little bit about radio dramas and like, how did you get into comics to begin with? Was it always like the radio and the older stuff, or like what was that story for you?
No, I mean, I grew up a DC guy. So although my first comic book was a Hulk comic book, my mom, when I was like 5 or 6, took me over to the local mall, and they had a guy in a Hulk suit. That's awesome. In the middle of summer. Poor guy must have walked like 100 pounds sweating that day, because I'm guessing it was fiberglass or asbestos or something that was killing him. Yeah. And so we got to see the Hulk, and we got a free comic, and so that was the first comic I ever got. But I mean, I grew up. I'm of the age where I got to watch the Super Friends on Saturday morning, and so I grew up watching the Super Friends and then getting the comics and the Mego action figures. Like, I'd save up my allowance and I'd go to Toys R Us and I'd buy the next Mego action figure and so on. What's really funny is, because of the Super Friends, my parents thought that all the comics were kind of the same, right? They were all kind of kids' comics. And my favorite, again, was Green Arrow. Well, that was during the Denny O'Neil run, when, it was like, oh, Speedy's a heroin addict and there's racism and so on. And I was buying and reading those along with the, Superman and Batman that were, that were much more kid appropriate at the time. So that was really eye opening. Like, again, very early on, I learned that comics can be more than just what you see on the Super Friends, that there's actually some depth there. And maybe it was and I know a lot of people think the Denny O'Neil run was a little over the top, but I mean, it was, it had a point of view, and I like that. I mean, and it's so funny when I hear people now complaining about comics being woke. I'm like, dude, go check out what Denny O'Neil was writing in 1970, man. Right. You don't know, but I mean, he was doing it not just from a point of view, but a well-researched point of view. Like, he made a point of researching the issues and then writing about them. And, and I think that's, I think that really formed kind of the way I think about comic, because that opened me up to, when you see the Watchmen and you see, kind of the things that that Moore did, and even going back to like Steve Ditko and the original Question, I mean, that was a very specific point of view, and it's so funny actually, because the Question's another one of my favorite heroes, and you see like what Ditko did, and then they gave it to Denny O'Neil, and I'm like, oh, holy crap, like the amazing contrast between the two. And I even like like the current Question run. I'm really a big fan of what they're doing with Renee Montoya in that run. And again, it's a Ganda point of view to it, and I like that. And you know, and it's letting somebody who really loves that comic write that comic in the way that they think it should be done. You know, and that doesn't always work. But you know, it works with the Question, and it works with some of these other characters.
That's great. Yeah. See, my introduction to the Question was because Jeff Lemire was writing it.
Oh yeah.
And I love Jeff Lemire's work. And so I was like, well, I don't know anything about it, but it's like the Black Label. So it was the oversized magazine. And I'm a sucker for that format. And, you know, they were thicker, and I love that. And so I was just like, I mean, it's Jeff Lemire. Like, I don't know the character, but I mean, these covers look cool and I like the artwork. So I'll pick them up. And so that was my introduction to the Question. And I was just like, this is a really cool character. Like, there's a lot going on here just in those 4 issues from Lemire's run. And so I recently put out on Threads, like I kept seeing post after post about DC comics, and it seems like everybody is reading DC right now.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, I just commented like, there's a ton of DC using the hashtag of the comic threads or whatever. And like, what are you reading that you like right now? And there were like 6 or 7 people. It exploded. That was my like, I'm like, I do indie comics. Why is everybody loving the DC? Like, come on. But everybody was responding with like, oh man, this run's really good. This series is great. I love this one. And a bunch of people were talking about this new Question series that just started. And I was like, all right, I mean, I trade weight. And like with DC, I usually get them from my library because the library is amazing. And so it's on my radar to, once they get it to a trade, I got plenty of other stuff to read before then. I got a whole shelf of unread trades to read. And I've got several piles next to me that I need to catch up on. There's not enough time, Alan. I don't have enough time in a day to sleep and to work 40 hours and to do this and to be a husband and a dad and have a dog. Like, there's not enough time. Right. So if you can figure out how to make more time, that'd be great.
I'll tell you about our superhero The Clock when we get to it.
Perfect.
But yeah, all along the Watchtower is really good. Black Canary, Best of the Best, also really good. But as a Jeff Lemire fan, have you checked out Minor Arcana yet?
I'm trade waiting on that one.
Okay.
Because I saw his. I'm part of his Patreon or whatever Substack, whatever newsletter thing he's got. And so I've seen like a lot of his process on creating the covers for that. And it just looks like a really interesting, like it looks like a different book than he's typically done. So,
yeah, I mean, you know, if you're going for the superhero stuff and so on, it's not there. It really delves into the like mysticism and so on. But at the heart of it is a very recognizable Jeff Lemire character. And that's what I love. Like, the imperfect anti-hero is what he does better than, you know, most people writing today. And so, yeah, I really have been enjoying the Minor Arcana. So that's definitely cool. When the trade comes out, I would recommend picking it up.
Yeah. I have a whole, so I have like a floor to ceiling shelf in the basement. And it's got all my graphic novels on it. And I have a whole Jeff Lemire shelf, and I've got a whole Matt Kint shelf, and they're like right next to each other. And yeah, so at this point, like anything that they put out, even some of the stuff that I've read like issue by issue, I still will pick up the trade because my OCD says like, no, you need to have their books in trades in hardcover, and they're not the same size because they're from different publishers, and my OCD doesn't like, but it's all organized and it looks nice. And I want to read it and in one sitting, because his stories for sure are best when you just immerse yourself in the story and then have time once you finish it to be like, oh man, what did I just read? And that's usually my experience with Lemire, is just like, it's so heavy and so well written, it puts so much story in. Like, you're right, his imperfect like character building that he writes is just insanely good. And I haven't read anything from him that I'm like, that was all right. Everything is like, man, that was really great. So you mentioned the clock. So let's talk about your most recent book. It successfully funded in Kickstarter. It funded in last month, right?
No, funded. Oh yeah, I guess right. Yeah, because we're in February, right? So
Yeah.
yes, it funded in January.
Great.
Um, yeah,
The Press
we did.
Guardian.
It's our first time doing a Make 100, so it was a really small campaign. No variant covers, no nothing. It was like digital print signed, three levels. But it's just something that we wanted to do because we have modernized the characters. So we have our current Press Guardian and our current clock, but I really love the old characters, and I really love kind of bringing back these sometimes forgotten characters. The clock has a little more attention than the Press Guardian. Most people had never heard of that.
Yeah.
But being able to tell their story in their time is a lot of fun. And anytime you can punch Nazis, is always to me is always a win. So and in fact, if you kind of read any of the background, one of the things that I thought was really funny is, so the Press Guardian only ran in 1940. The clock ran from 1936 to about 41, 42. I don't remember when the last issue was. But both of them got to fight Germans or German stand-ins, but they never got to fight Nazis. And part of that was until January of 1941, most comic book creators, not the creators, but the publishers, were afraid to openly say, we're going to punch Nazis. And then, of course, in January 1941, Captain America just like, you know what, we're going to punch not just Nazis, we're going to punch Hitler right on the cover. And then that kind of opened it up. So like, the Press Guardian fought the Monronia Bund, which was a stand-in for the German American Bund, in the U.S., and everyone is now very familiar with the fact that the German American Bund is the one that organized the 1939 Madison Square Garden rally, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But he didn't get to fight the German bunts. Now the bad guys were like von whatever and so on. Yeah. And then, the clock got to fight spies that were trying to steal, secret American chemicals that were named Fritz and Carl, but the country they came from wasn't explicitly. And I'm like, these dudes, and especially the clock, the Press Guardian, because that was created by Mort Meskin, who was Jewish and very much aware of what was happening in Germany. So for him not to be able to write a character that could punch Nazis, I'm like, that felt like a disservice. And kind of the same thing with the clock. And I'm like, so let's get them out there and let's just have them go ham on some Nazis. And so we got to do that. And I think tell a really interesting story, tell a story based on real events that we put a comic book spin on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm such a sucker for the historical fiction where it's like these events happened, but like, what if this slightly different thing happened instead? What would have occurred? What would have gone down? And the issue, so the 1942 issue is like, I love that it's so, I was going to ask about the Nazi like presence in it, because it's definitely not subdued. It's not like Nazis, what I mean? Like, it's very like, oh, they're just going straight for it. And so I was wondering, like, is it, while staying true to the character, was there some sort of element that felt like, we definitely need to just directly address the enemy is the Nazis? And you kind of already spoke to it, but like, with these two characters specifically, was it because you felt that there was that disservice of like, we all knew what they were doing, but like, I don't want to beat around the bush. They need to be able to punch Hitler in the face. Like, they need to be able to punch Helga and Colonel Voxenstocken. Like, they need to be able to do that to have their like full circle completed. Like, is that what drew you to these two specifically for this tale?
Yeah, so I don't just want to use the names of characters. I don't just want to tell a Johnny Dollar story with the name Johnny Dollar. There's too much of that. Like, I've seen I love The Saint. I love Ian Fleming's version of James Bond. And I see these comic books that slap their name on there and then it doesn't feel like the real character. So I wanted to embody what I think the characters do. Like, we're very selective. I mean, one, we have to be because we don't have unlimited funds. Um, we're very selective about the characters that we choose. We read the material thoroughly. So my brother Ben and I, we get every comic that had the clock in it, every comic that had the Press Guardian, and we share that with each other so we can read everything that's there. And so we want to build that extension from the characters. Now, there's some things that there was some casual racism in some of the comics that we decided that we were going to ignore. But we wanted to, we want to make it feel like, there aren't that many fans of the Press Guardian anymore. There are a handful of fans of the Clock. But if you happen to be a fan of either one of those, I want you to pick this up and go, oh yeah, or even if you're just a fan of 1940s comics, of Golden Age comics, I want you to pick that up and go, that feels like a Golden Age comic. Like, that feels like what they would do in their time. Again, a little less casual racism, but with everything else in there, same thing. We've had so many people who are fans of the Yours Truly Johnny radio show that read our comic and go, man, that feels like where Johnny Dollar would be today if he was around. And that to me feels good. Like, that feels like, okay, you're doing the character justice, because now that they're in the public domain and anybody can use those characters, I want it to feel true to them. There's the running gag where as soon as Winnie the Pooh or Steamboat Willie goes into the public domain, somebody puts together a low budget horror movie. And it doesn't feel real. Like, you just want to be the first one out there with it. That's not what we want.
That's cool. I love that. I mean, so I guess if I was going to invite you over to watch Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, you'd be like, hard pass.
Yeah, I'm all for horror movies. I love a good horror movie. I really liked, and I was surprised too. I really liked the new Nosferatu.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's not like the old Nosferatu. It's not like the original movie, which I also really like. But I thought that they took good care of the character.
Yeah, that was also the general consensus that I heard from a lot of people that saw it right away, was they have the same adoration that we do for the original, and they wanted to do that original movie justice by just modernizing it. And because it's probably top 5, the original is probably a top 5 horror movie for me, like, period. I love it unironically. I watch it every year. I just like it. There's something about it that is just so, it sticks with you. Like, I easily, one of those weird, my wife is on TikTok and she'll just randomly ask, like, how often do you think about Roman empires? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know, maybe once a month. And she was like, seriously? I don't know. But it's like a trend on TikTok. Like, yeah, wives ask your husbands this, because all of them are like, oh yeah, like every other day. But Nosferatu is a movie that I think of pretty much weekly, because it just is so good. And like the framing of it, and again, with the broadcasting background, knowing what they did to make that movie, and use of lighting and the use of just the camera angles and the whole production of it is so well done that I just like, it just constantly lives forever in my brain. And so I was hesitant to see the new one. And if I'm being honest, I still haven't seen it because it's not free yet on any streaming service. But like, everybody that I talked to has said, like, don't have hesitations. Like, go into it with your love of the original, because they do it justice. And so I love that you're trying to do the same thing with these public domain characters, because as somebody who loves Golden Age comics, and I especially like the old Western comics, I don't even like Western movies, but Western comics from like way, like the Golden Age, they're so much fun, because it's just like nostalgia in a book. And I don't care that they're wordy, and I don't care. I like that. And so I love that you're modernizing and keeping true to the original legacy that these characters have. So my question then is, if they're all in public domain, like how does that work to then make a comic book using those characters?
So what we do is we have a lawyer, and we just make sure that we're free and clear to use them. You know, that there's no rights or anything that we have to worry about. And once they run an IP check and make sure that that's good, then we do. We can copyright our work. We just can't copyright the character.
Okay.
So and that's what we do. We copyright our comics. But but if somebody else wants to make a clock or wants to make a press guardian, they can absolutely do that. Just can't do the same stories that we did because those are copyrighted.
Got it.
So, and it's why we try not to do the original story, because then it's too close to what anybody else can do. Like, we're telling our own stories with these characters again, but keeping the traits and everything in the character. So please, if you are listening and you want to make a clock or a press guardian, and right now the press could probably use more guardians, please do. The more people that love these characters, the better. Plus, now that I have a full collection of all the Press Guardian comics, if a whole bunch of people make new ones, they will go up in value.
There you go.
And I can probably finally prove my wife that it's worth it to save all these comic books.
I know we haven't had space in this room for years, honey, but those books are now worth a ton of money.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's a much easier, like, come on, just another. Can I just get one more box? Yeah, I'm currently, that's the other reason I trade weight, because I'm out of space. Like I just 12 long boxes and a short box are enough. I don't have any more room. So, and my wife frequently, every time I go to my shop and come back, because I can't go, even though I go and I pick up the trades, I can't go and not pick up at least one more book. You know what I mean? There's always yeah, and there's always going to be books in the dollar bin that I'm going to look through, especially when I'm in a new bookstore, because they will always have different things. Like mine always has issues of Checkmate, always has issues of Warlord. Like those are always going to be in my local shop's dollar bin box. So if you need either of those series, you can fill all of your holes at that's we're going to move on from that. I can't, I love that these characters, though, it feels very authentic to the original characters because they're still fighting crime in like 3-piece suits and long jackets and fedoras. And I love that the colors of all of those are the same for like each different character has a different color.
Right.
Is that how they originally were too?
Oh, yeah. Well, so the clock went from having a black suit to a blue suit. I just like the blue suit better, so I went with the blue suit. Same thing. The clock also went from Pug, who had a brown suit, to a 13-year-old girl who had a big crush on him as his sidekick, and I'm like, we're gonna stay away from that. There's enough bad of that in comics, so let's I know Batman's been getting away with it for 70 years now, but we're going to stay away from the 13-year-old girl sidekick. But yeah, in the original comic, that they all wore the same color and the same suit. In fact, in our modern version of these, the Press Guardian wears green, and the her alter ego Perry Chase with an eye wears a green dress. Like, we're not putting, we're not doing fashion statements. This isn't like Lois Lane or Diana Prince. This is, trying to keep with the aesthetic of that. And same thing with our modern clock. She wears the black version of the suit because at some point I'm going to slip in. The difference is I make this look good. In his way that I can do it, that is not going to get me sued by large companies that made movies where that line may be famous from. Yeah. And then she wears a lot of black when she does, her day job. So we just, again, wanted to keep that aesthetic in that feel.
That's cool. Yeah, and you definitely do. I need to know, though, as you're writing these stories, are you also listening to like the big band music from the 30s and like the jazz records? Are you also like fully submersing yourself
Your
in
little
what it would
Andrews
have been like?
sisters, the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B. Yeah,
Yeah.
so yes. So we absolutely do that. My playlist varies depending on which comic I'm writing at the time. If I want to think like a 28-year-old woman, I put on some Taylor Swift, and and if I want to think like the old guys, I think like so some big band swing music is absolutely the way to go.
That's great. I there's something to be said, and it's impossible to like have tangible proof of that, but I definitely think that if you fully immerse yourself with the music in whatever you're writing, and it could be like, when I'm writing like the sci-fi story that just keeps shaking around in my brain, I'm listening to like to like almost cyber techno music that feels very like, oh, this is a neon futuristic car driving down like fake electric palm tree drive, and everything is digital and virtual. And like I have to, if I listen to that, I feel like it just makes my brain wake up, and it's like, oh yeah, no, this is cyberpunk, and this is very futuristic and neons, and this would be a cool thing to put into that story because it fits that mood. And that's so it's like tricking my brain to pump more creatively in the direction that I'm trying to be writing anyway. And so like anytime I hear other creators that are like, yeah, it varies with the book or the character or what have you, it's just like, cool. Okay. Yeah, that's the intangible thing that I've been right about all this time, that just proves like I have a great proof of concept with this show, with comics and music. So
Right. Well, I am very much not a 27-year-old woman, so I need to be in a little bit in that headspace to write the right dialogue, to not sound like a 50, like the meme of, hello fellow teenagers, like where I'm trying to do that. Now, we also have some really good editors that work with us that will double and triple check the dialogue to make sure. I mean, that was a big problem with the with the Clock and the Press Guardian crossover, is how do you make three distinct voices from 1940s white dudes? And that was, and in particular Pug, because Pug, who is all of our favorite characters, because he gets to say the fun of not, he's like the thing of the story, like he gets the best lines.
yeah.
But he had, coming as an ex-con, coming from lower socioeconomic status, how do you make him sound different than the other guys without making him sound like a buffoon? So dialogue is really important to us, in comics, because you want it to feel like it's coming from the character, and you want each character to have their own personality.
Yeah. So speaking of working with editors, like how do you connect with editors to do that? Do you have somebody that specifically is like, yeah, I'm your editor, Allan, so anything you write, I will or do you just like, is it like a contract thing of
Yeah.
you find somebody and like, hey, you edit stuff, right? Cool, let me hire you to do the thing.
We use the same editor. We use the same three editors, across our comics, because we want to be consistent with how that goes. And we have three editors that we trust. And that's the important thing, is to build that trust. Same thing, like we try and use the same letter across everything, because we trust her and we trust her design capabilities. And so we want, we want to keep that consistent quality.
Yeah.
And so, so that's, but it is, we're not hunting for new editors for every comic, because I find that counterproductive. You want people to know your voice. And also I want people who aren't just going to tell me, yeah, that's great, love it. Like I want people that are like, I suggest this. We're not going to accept all of them, but we want to make sure that we have that back and forth and can have that conversation in there. And I think editing is one of those things that gets overlooked in a lot of indie comics. To me, it's really important, because you want somebody to have that sanity check of yours. Especially, I have a Kevin Smith problem where I just want to all the words on the page.
Yeah.
And so having somebody who can And Kevin, if you're listening, I'm sorry, I love your comics, but you talk way too damn much, man. You can have somebody that's going to say, no, you need to trim this down. You need to trim this down. You really didn't need to say that. And even some things, like we've had editors come in and say, the mantra in comics is always show, don't say. And we've had, some editors come in and say, man, you're overshowing. Just say it here. You don't need this much exposition in like background format. And that's always, having those people that we trust makes that process easier.
That's cool. Yeah. And I would think, especially with editing, because there is that back and forth, like it's much easier to hear almost like a criticism of like, hey, you need to tighten this up a bit. Like it's easier to hear that from somebody who you have worked with or who you've developed that trust with, instead of just like, hey, I'm going to give you a random name out of my phone and a phone number, and you're going to call them and they're going to critique your work. Like those are two very different feedback sessions. Right. And the relational capital then, once it's established, is much easier to lean on when it's like, hey, we gotta have a tough conversation. Like this doesn't land well. We got to figure this out. Like it needs to be reworked. And I'm sorry, but like, and because that their heart is, I want you to have the best product possible. Yeah. And I think as society, and this is getting maybe a little bit philosophical.
Hey, I mean, we've touched on sociology and psychology. Let's do philosophy.
So as a society, I feel like the receiving constructive criticism and feedback is now, you don't like what I'm doing, so you don't like me, so you're against me. Now you're my counterpart and you're my villain where I'm the hero. And it's like, that's not the case. Sometimes it might be. Like there are those people out there that are just like, no, that's trash, you're trash, bye. And those people are probably Nazis and should probably be punched in the face. But
they're the ones in the comment section of YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a whole separate video. But I think, I don't know how, and I don't have the answer, and that's okay because I don't need to. But like, I don't know how we go back to, hey, I want to give you a tough truth that I need you to hear without also being your, like, I don't want to vilify myself, right. But this thing that you're doing, like you could do it better. Or like it's not working how you think it's working. And I get a buddy that tells a ton of jokes and they don't typically land. And I don't know how to tell him like, hey man, your timing just isn't there. Like you're forcing it and it's not working. And that's why no one's laughing. And like, just think about it more before you start doing the thing, But like, I don't know how to have that conversation because they don't teach that anywhere. So I don't know. There it is.
No. I mean, I agree completely. And it is, and again, that's where that building up that web of trust is important. So in the 4th issue of our Modern Press Guardian, I tried a joke that failed miserably with everybody. So she's in a neo-Nazi compound and they've captured her and, they're threatening to kill her. And behind them on the wall, they have a Nazi flag and a Confederate flag. And she makes the joke, oh, I see you have a Nazi flag and a Confederate flag. I'm surprised you don't have a picture of Glass Joe up there as well. And as a huge fan of Punch-Out, that is hilarious to me. It wasn't funny to anybody else. And so if my target reader was fans of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out from the 1990s, 80s, whenever that came out, then that joke would be hilarious. But since that's not my target audience, I have to rework that kind of whole thing. And I love that joke so much, but it just didn't land with anybody. And, and as several people pointed out to me, that is not something a 27-year-old woman would say.
It's fair. It's fair. Yeah, there have been some things that will come up in regular conversation, and I'll say, like, I got a buddy that I've known now for almost 30 years, and we still talk regularly. He lives like 5 states away from me, but he's an in-home physical therapist. So he has a long commute between patients' houses, and I work from home. So if I'm not on a phone call for work, like I'm just doing emails or data entry or whatever, so I can talk to him, and we laugh and joke all the time. We have so many inside jokes, it's ridiculous. But like someone will say something and it triggers an inside joke with him, and I'll respond with that joke, and then everybody's like, "What?" And sorry, that's a joke for one person. You're not the one person, sorry. But that's definitely true. And I definitely see that play out all the, like, I say stuff to my wife that I would just can't help myself, that I would respond to him with. And then she's like, "Gabby," and I'm like, "Yeah, Gabby, sorry, this." It's good to have those friends though,
Yes, it is. So I do that with music lyrics all the time. Somebody will start off a music lyric unintentionally.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot tell me that you live on the west side of Philadelphia without me finishing the line from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And people look at me like, "What is wrong with you?" I'm sorry, man. You can't phrase it that way.
Yeah.
If you say you're from West Philly, then you were born and raised, and on the playground is where you spent most of your days. End of discussion.
Chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool, shooting some b-ball probably outside of the school.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things that I'm the only one that finds funny, but I can't help it. I'm going to do it anyway to you.
Yeah, that's the thing. My wife will say all the time, like, "You're the only person laughing at your own jokes." I'm like, "Hey, at least someone's laughing." Like, I don't care. I don't care if I'm the only one laughing. There's so much negative nonsense outside of everything that, like, why can't I act ridiculous and tell stupid jokes and like just say and finish song lyrics and then laugh about it? Because you gotta laugh. Like, we need to laugh more. And another post-punk, Anton, he posted something on his Instagram story, and he was like, "You can find me frolicking here." And it was like a picture of like just this beautiful landscape. And I responded like, "We need more frolicking in the world." And ever since, I'm like looking for chances to frolic. I was working in office one of the 2 days of the month. I think it was last month. And we were waiting across the street to walk to lunch, and it was me and a bunch of my coworkers, and we're all finance. They're all finance people. I'm not. I just happen to work there. And we're crossing the street, and I was like, "I'm going to skip right now." And so I just started skipping, and I like skipped across the street and then turned and looked, and they were all just still talking. I'm like, "Blah, blah, 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 blah." Like, y'all just totally missed it. I had this and like I made eye contact with the car that was sitting at the light waiting to turn, and they were like, "What is he doing?" And I'm like, "I'm just skipping. I'm just frolicking. Like, just why is everything so heavy all the time? Let's go back to having fun and laughing."
I mean, I get it. There's a lot heavy in the world, and totally, but you have to find that, and I'm going to steal this from Superstore, but you have to find that moments of beauty, right? And whatever that is for you, wherever you can have that fun, because there's a lot serious in the world, but you can't be serious all the time. You lose your damn mind.
Yeah, there's plenty of time to be serious, but like you said, if you are only ever serious all the time, like, you're gonna go crazy. We were not made to be serious all the time. We were meant to live with joy and like lightheartedness. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a Christian and like I believe in a God and all of those things. And I'm not going to get preachy, but like maybe my faith is why I have the joy that I do, and I just don't care. Like, I just don't care. I have no shame. Like, my daughter knew from a very young age that like she was screwed, and I'm just going to do anything. And so now, instead of getting embarrassed by it, she just smiles and laughs and high fives and all like she just leans into it now because she knows it's going to happen. Because I've stood up at lunch in a restaurant and just started singing "I'm a Little Teapot" just because I want to embarrass her. And, like, we've done that, and so now we can just have fun with it. And who cares? What are you gonna? I'm never gonna see these people again in my life. What what is you thinking I'm a weirdo do for anybody?
Yeah.
I don't care. So things I do care about are comics. What's so now that you've got the team up, are you like, what's next? Are you going to keep doing team ups with them, or are you going to break back to just doing like standalone stories for the clock?
So I don't know where we're going to go with these yet. Part of it is let's see how well it's received. The Kickstarter was great, but you know how much it costs to make a comic. The money that we made from Kickstarter doesn't fully cover the cost of the comic, and that's fine. We didn't expect it to. We're going to go out and do a couple cons, see how well it sells. I have a couple ideas for what I want to do. Actually, and please don't cut this into a short. We actually really like the Nazis that we have as the villains here, and so we have a 3-arc story that we're going to tell. So we're going to do this Indiana Jones style, as my brother Ben likes to say. We're going to go back, and for the next story, we're going to go back to them fighting the Green Archer, and that'll be out later this year. And then next year, we have another character that we want to introduce, the Green Shadow. And this is based on a 1930 detective novel. So if you're familiar with Sam Spade, the Green Shadow makes Sam Spade look like a 2-year-old girl, in terms of toughness and ruthlessness and so on. So again, we're going to tone down some of the sexism, sure. But I really want to tell a hard-bitten like detective story like that. Plus, he's in Chicago with the mob and the corrupt cops and so on, and having like the Nazis take on not just him but the mob and the corrupt cops and so on. And it times up perfectly with this story, because in 1942 in Chicago is when they did the first nuclear tests and proved that nuclear weapons were possible. They didn't set off a bomb in Chicago or anything, but that is where they built the first prototype of you can set off a bomb. So imagine the Nazis get wind of that. They head to Chicago next to basically blow up Chicago. And it's like this detective and the and the mob and the cops all have to kind of come together to try and stop them before they blow up Chicago. And so awesome. I'm kind of like, that would be really cool. And then the question becomes, okay, do you bring in the Green Archer or do you bring in the Press Guardian and the Clock as well and just have a whole team up against them? Yeah. I don't know if that's what we're going to do or not, but we definitely have a way for that story to end. And then we have some other ideas where we can continue to do team ups with the Press Guardian and the Clock as we kind of figure out. I want to. There's maybe the possibility of doing individual stories for each. Because they each deserve their own, because they were part of anthology collections, right? So they were 6 pages at a time is what you got of each. So I'd love to give them each like 32 pages to breathe, right? And tell a whole story. Again, limited funds, and if we can prove that there's a market for this, then we'll see. So we start the comic book convention circuit shortly, and we'll see how well it does. We're going to take them to Pulp Fest in Pittsburgh later this year. So that'll be a big test, because that should be like, if we don't sell any there, then we know that we've really failed our target market. We joke all the time that when we go to comic book conventions, our comics are all targeted toward the cosplayers' dads or moms. And so, that's who always like, they'll be in tow with their kids and like, wait, Johnny Dollar, the radio show? Or, the Green Archer, like the Edgar Wallace book? And like, yes, let me tell you about that, while their kids stand there going, Mom, Dad, Come on, we
Yeah.
gotta go.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's good too to like know your audience. Like there's something to be said for understanding, these are the people that are really going to appreciate that. And so going to like that pulp con, that's probably a perfect like that's your demographic. So yeah, you're right. Like if that's not gonna work there, then I don't know what it means for you, but like that's great to. I mean, another guy that has been on the show before, Carmen, has a horror comic and he goes to horror conventions, not even comic conventions. They're like horror conventions,
Yep.
but he'll bring his comic there because he's like, these are the people that would be reading it. They just don't know that they like horror comics yet, maybe but if they like horror, I got horror. So here, if you like pulp, we got noir, we've got not just like a feel of it, we have the characters from that time. And I think that's a win. That's such a huge home run win to connect with that audience.
Yeah, the other place where we found success, because we turned Johnny Dollar into a cyber insurance investigator, is we found some success at cybersecurity conferences. But if you've ever been to a cybersecurity conference, the one problem we have is all the things at the booth that the other people have are free. Ours are not free, and so we have to slap a lot of hands and go, no, $10. But yeah, and there is an advantage, like when you're talking about the horror cons, it's a big advantage being one or two comic book vendors instead of being one of 50 comic book vendors. It's much easier to get that attention. We've done a couple of local book fairs that we'll do, like one of the coffee shops does a book fair, and it's a bunch of local authors and then us. And so people come over and like, oh, you have comic books. That's kind of cool. I'll take that. And so I do like finding those. I mean, I grew up going to comic book conventions, so I want to keep doing that. Yeah. But it's hard for a small indie press to get noticed at a comic book convention, and it's getting more expensive and so on. And so at some point, is it worth it to continue doing that when there are maybe better avenues for sales?
Yeah. And just being open to those other avenues, like I feel like that gives you a leg up automatically, because not everybody's even thinking of it. They're just like, oh yeah, I gotta go to a comic convention because that's where you sell comics that are not with the big two. So like that's what I gotta do. But then taking that next step further of like, yeah, but like there's, like you said, there's 50 other comic creators there that are all trying to sell their comics. What if I stand out by going to this like other, local author fair, or if a library has like featured creator day and any local creators get to show up and peddle their books, like what if we go there? How do we stand out within our market, knowing our demographic and knowing our audience, and then how do we connect with those people where they are, instead of like, hey, you missed a chance to do the thing because you didn't go to a comic convention. Like, well, I don't like comic books. Like, why would I go to a comic convention?
Right.
It's like, ooh, that's like that those are those additional steps that, as a small press, knowing and having such a niche that you do, like it really, I think, gives you that leg up and like a better step forward than some other folks do, who are just like, I just like making comics, so I'm making everything. It's like, great, like that's awesome, and I'm happy that you're doing it, but like you have to define who your audience is. I know who my audience is, so it's very easy for me to talk to them because it's me. Like I'm my audience. I always tell people, like, I just kind of fell into doing this thing. Like I just wanted to do a show where I got to talk to people, specifically comic people, and it just kind of grew and evolved. And in 6 months last year, like I figured out, I know what my show is and who it's talking to, and I know how to talk to them because I know how to talk to myself because I do it every day. It's when I answer that my wife starts getting problematic and questioning things. So, so those are my official questions. But as you know, I have two more things for you. The first is I want to take a screenshot so that we get to pose, and that'll be the YouTube thumbnail to live forever. That's mainly, it makes my life easier. And you get to look how you want to look instead of me just picking something out. So I'll count to 3. I got my keyboard shortcut here, and we will go 3, 2, 1. Great. The other thing that I want you to do, so I like talking to comic creators and comic people because we already have the same starting base point of we think comics are cool. So, but everyone has a different perspective and different life experience that has brought them into creating comics. I want you to have a chance that's watching this or listening this, anything that you want them to hear from you. It could be about why the clock could actually beat the press guardian in a fight. It could be about why punching Nazis is the best thing ever. The content doesn't matter. I just want you to have a chance to be able to speak directly to anybody that's watching or listening to this, to hear anything from you. So the floor is yours, my friend.
My wife's only going to let me make comics at a loss for so long before I get in a lot of trouble. So buy my comics just so that our marriage stays together. No, that's so. You know, I'm really bad at this. We were at Baltimore Comic-Con last year, and there was a guy at the table next to us who everybody walked by. Can I tell you about my comic? Can I tell you about my comic? And did a ton of sales because of that. We're not that type where, you know, I've spent my whole life in dark rooms typing on a keyboard. So being out and being energetic and pitching the comic is hard. That's why I published myself, because I don't think I could write a pitch. It is, you know, what I'll tell people is these are interesting stories. Like, go listen to the old Johnny Dollar radio shows. Go watch, if you've got a spare 4 hours. You know what? If you're not watching the Super Bowl tonight, use that time to watch The Green Archer. The whole movie is available on YouTube. You can watch all 4 hours of it. If you can find old copies of the Press Guardian and The Clock, they're really interesting. So are the stories of the creators behind them. Mort Meskin is fascinating, and he influenced so much of what happens in modern comics today, but most people don't know him because he wasn't part of the big two. He wasn't, he eventually worked for DC, but he wasn't part of the big two. These are really fascinating stories. So we hope that we're carrying on the tradition, and I'm not high-minded. Like, I want to make your money. I want you to buy my damn comics, please. But we hope, and we are trying really hard to carry on the tradition of great characters that were already made, like, because we think that that's a really cool thing to do, because we've, again, going back to what we were talking about, we've like lost that connection, right? Like, my parents watched Gilligan's Island when it was on TV live, and then I'd come home after school and there was Gilligan's Island, and we had that Gilligan's Island connection. My son has no idea what Gilligan's Island is, and he'd be appalled at like how terrible an idea for a show that was. I mean, I say that as a guy who watches he spent a lot of his youth watching a show about a sponge that lived in a pineapple. So but these are really interesting stories, and a lot of what we hear today was built on these interesting stories, and so I hope you'll go back to the source material and listen and learn and enjoy that, and then buy the comics and see that we are kind of carrying on the tradition. How about that? Again, I know that was really long-winded.
Nope,
but
not at all, man. That was perfect. That was exactly what you wanted people to hear, and they heard it. So there it is. And like, can we just recognize how freaking cool of a name Johnny Dollar is?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That's such a, like, I heard that and I was like, oh my God, there's got to be a pro wrestler that's Johnny Dollar. And like, he comes out in the trench coat, and like his whole thing is he's just a like wheeling dealing manager that's trying to take over the wrestling promotion or whatever. Cause it just like, it's such a catchy, it'll stick with you, stick to your ribs food, but it's a name that will stick to your, like, it's just such a cool name.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for hanging out with me for pre-gaming. I missed all of my wings, and I'm gonna go make up for that. But I appreciate you hanging out with me. Sincerely, this is a great time. Hang out after I end the stream. I got some logistics for you. But as for the rest of you, thanks for hanging out with us. If you like the show, leave a comment and subscribe and share this with your friends and do the things and the stuff, whatever. I don't care. I'm doing this for me. I'm my audience. So I enjoyed it. And that's what matters to me. What's a good podcast without a good tagline? This is mine. Go do what's good for you, punks, and read some indie comics. We are out of here. And then we wait.